Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Chris Irwin and I'm the President of the Australian Society of General Practice. To all the GPs out there in yet another day and week of lockdown, my heart goes out to you. Everyone at ASGP feels the same and we'll all get through this stronger together on the other side. So I really just want to tell everyone to hang in there. I want to talk about a different topical issue today, which is payroll tax and why the recent decisions by the New South Wales and Victorian governments are a terrible idea for GP contractors, a terrible idea for general practice owners, and a terrible idea for the people that we care most about, which are our patients. Now, to explain all of this, I first have to talk about what the heck payroll tax actually is. So I apologise profusely to my colleagues who many can be insanely bored by the nuts and bolts of the economics of general practice. But I think it's really important that we all understand these financial concepts because they have such a massive impact on our patients. Payroll tax is essentially a 5% tax. It varies state by state, but for ease of this discussion, let's say it's a 5% tax on the payroll of staff and contractors who are deemed non-exempt from payroll tax. Now, general practice has been paying payroll tax for years. All nurses or receptionists, essentially, we pay payroll tax on because they're employees and that is the right thing to do. Recently, the Victorian and New South Wales governments, and I'm sure other states will follow, are making what appears to be a concerted effort to start taxing the income of GP contractors as part of payroll tax for state revenue purposes. That's a lot of gobbledygook, but essentially, let's talk about a hypothetical practice so I can explain how this is insane and how it threatens the viability of GP-owned general practice. Let's talk about a hypothetical clinic which has a 35% service fee. Now, with a well-run medium to large general practice, a marker of a well-run practice is they make about a 20% profit off the service fee component of total revenue. So what that means is a well-run medium to large general practice that is focused on profit as well as patient care hopes to make around 7% of the total revenue of billings, i.e. 20% of 35%, in profit. Now I have to emphasize this is well-run medium to large sized clinics. Small to medium sized clinics, especially GP-run small to medium sized clinics that have an emphasis on patient care over profit are most likely running at a far sharper profit point, probably somewhere in the region of 5% to 10%, for example. Now, what payroll tax is payroll tax, for simplification, is an extra 5% tax on the 65% of billings that is the income of the contractor. Now, for simplification purposes, let's say 5% of 65% is around 3.25%. It's slightly lower, but let's just stick to sort of round numbers. So you can see if you have a well-run practice with a profit based on total billings of around 7%, you've already halved that with an additional 3.25% tax, so 7 minus 3.25% becomes around 3.75. So you've essentially halved the profitability of a practice through the unfair insertion of a new tax onto general practice. Now, that doesn't even account, of course, for all the other taxes that currently exist. So if you look essentially at how much the income of owning a general practice will be taxed now, for a well-run practice, it's an essential tax rate of about 70%, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, why does this affect GPs and GP contractors? Surely this is the problem for rich practice owners and corporates. The effect of these changes is it is nonsensical as a GP to be involved in ownership or running a clinic, for the simple reason that you will make more per hour simply being a contractor as opposed to running the medical business without all the risks, without all the heartache and stress and tears. It's a nonsensical proposition. What this does is it puts the final nail in GP-owned general practice and pushes us more towards a corporatisation of medicine in Australia. Now, corporatisation can have pros and cons. It's a more lean setup. It's more profitable for the shareholders of businesses. Profitability by itself is, and corporatisation, not something that we should besmirch without reason. But bear in mind a couple of things as a GP contractor. What we will notice increasingly over the next decade, if these changes continue or are completely implemented, is a disconnect between the individual GP on the ground and ownership. So GPs on the ground will have less involvement day to day in how their clinics look, run, and what the values of the clinics that they work in are. The second point requires us to look far more into the future, but is far more terrifying. We already know that the main money in healthcare is pathology, in large part due to their guild being so influential in federal politics, and to a lesser extent radiology. Now, what the state governments are doing without realising it is by putting the final nails in the coffin of small to medium practice size profitability, they're creating a situation in which general practice could be seen as the loss leader within medicine, in which the main interests of owning general practices may not be so related to the general practice itself, but the insanely profitable referral streams that originate from general practice. For example, pathology. Now, think for a moment the absolutely bizarre forces that are at play here, in which the state governments are encouraging the general practice to be increasingly owned by pathology and other sort of large corporates. But remember also that we know that lower quality general practice refers for more tests. They order more scans, they order more blood tests. It's what you have to do within the context of very short, low-value consults. So the long-term ramifications of what can simply seem like such a small change to general practice is potentially a perverse incentive in which pathology companies owning general practice may have an incentive to decrease the quality of care of general practice because it becomes more profitable. That sounds like the worst possible idea for our brother and sister GPs. It's of course the worst possible idea for our GP colleagues that are in practice ownership. But most important of all, it harms our patients. Like, that's why we're in this to begin with. So all in all, I think these payroll tax changes are short-sighted, unfairly and haphazardly implemented, and are a threat to our current model of general practice in Australia. So what do we do about it? I mean, the first thing is that more and more general practice needs to realise that we can't just sit here and wait for well-meaning, well-mannered people in government to realise a problem exists and change it. The last decade has shown us that's not the case, and the last decade has unfortunately shown us that organisations who theoretically stand up for us are dead silent on the issues that affect our actual viability in our profession as a whole. I implore the ASGP to even just release a statement about this. I implore the AMA to do everything they can to fight for us. In the absence of these organisations standing up for general practice, though, we have to do that. I would urge you to join organisations like the Australian Society of General Practice, like the GP Alliance, founded